I could feel the house slipping away long before the sheriff ever knocked. In the small silences at breakfast, in the way the mortgage notice sat like a stone on the kitchen counter. We weren't reckless criminals or lottery losers. We were people who trusted a smooth voice and a promise, and that trust nearly cost us everything. If you think scams only happen to other people, listen to this. It will change how you look at every can't miss opportunity. My name is Nate Reed, and this is the story of how I got conned, how the bank nearly took our home, and how, against a lot of odds and a lot of embarrassment, I clawed us back. You should know right away, I am not a victim who waited for rescue. I am the guy who doubled down on late night spreadsheets, who learned to read legal letters like they were recipe cards, who lied to himself and then kept lying just enough to keep going. There's humor here, if dark. There's arrogance, if fresh. There's a kind of small, stubborn hope, too. And yeah, there will be names that sound like movies because they should. The scammer's name was Jordan Voss, which already reads like a villain intro. We were living in an old Craftsman on Maple Street in a town that smelled like diesel in the morning and apple pie in the evening. Ellie, my wife, worked afternoons at the clinic, and I did contract web work, which paid in bursts, fat months and famine months. We'd saved a little. Not enough to feel secure, but enough for us to believe we were not completely reckless. I'd always liked to believe I was careful. Turns out, careful is a relative term. It started with a party, a brunch at a friend's place where someone, always someone, started bragging about this guy who could put money to work like a printing press. He had charts that looked like escalators, screenshots with round numbers, testimonials that read like tiny miracles. "We're in on it," my friend said, leaning back, the kind of lean people do when they want you to think they're not leaning at all. Guaranteed returns, institutional plays, you'd be stupid not to. That's where I made the first human mistake. I listened to the bravado of someone who wanted to be admired. The second mistake was thinking admiration could be bought with a single wire transfer. Jordan's pitch was vintage modern con, slick website, a LinkedIn profile where every word meant wealth, a Zoom deck that used phrases like disruptive arbitrage and low correlation alpha. He answered my questions with other questions that felt like answers. He sent wire instructions, a PDF that looked official, and a screenshot of an account balance that had numbers so pretty I nearly cried. I wired half of our rainy day savings, the chunk that paid one mortgage and a small part of another. I told myself this is the thing that converts stress into security. 3 weeks later, my account wouldn't let me withdraw. The portal had new login errors, then maintenance, then the kind of canned empathy emails that feel rehearsed because they were rehearsed. Jordan texted me back slower, his grammar softened like a man trying to sleep on a conscience he had never owned. I called. He ghosted. Then I slept poorly and dreamed in email signatures. The first official paper arrived on a Tuesday. Notice of default. It was an elegant envelope, the kind that doesn't try too hard. My hands shook when I opened it, not from the letter itself, but from the months of small betrayals that led up to it. The late payments I'd swept under a digital rug, the lunches sold in garage sale afternoons I'd promised a better future for. The notice said simply, "We are entitled to begin foreclosure proceedings." It listed a date that sounded like a deadline and contained a dry instruction to contact the lender. In my panic, I did what my ego allowed. I called Jordan, and then the friend who introduced him. The friend said, "Man, sorry, I should have checked." Jordan answered after 3 days with an email. "Regrettably, an unforeseen liquidity event has delayed distribution. We're working to make whole." There it was again, the eternal promise of later. I remember thinking, with a clarity that felt both stupid and surgical, that Hoffa's ghost might have run a better con. Ellie sat me down at the kitchen table. There was a mug of coffee, 3 sippy cups from the kids, and that precise kind of quiet that either means very good news or very bad. "Tell me it's not as bad as it looks," she said. Her voice was even, which is how she fights fear. I wanted to say the words she needed, but they were stuck under the weight of the ledger on my laptop. We argued, not loud. We were too tired for that. But in the quiet, with flashes of the house in the daytime, with the sound of the neighbor's lawnmower, like a metronome marking the minutes we were losing. "You should have called the bank," she said finally, the accusation soft but real. "We could have worked something out." There is always that sentence in these stories, the if only, that lives like a scar. I folded it into my chest and promised to do the one thing I hadn't done: pick up the phone and speak to someone in authority. Banks are offices built on patience and paperwork. The bank rep I spoke with had a voice that suggested she drank tea for anger management. "Mr. Reed, we can begin loss mitigation," she said, the phrase a bland umbrella for many possibilities. She explained, in a way that I later appreciated for its blunt kindness, that in our state a lender must file a notice of default and provide a period, often a few months, before they can schedule a trustee's sale, and that homeowners may apply for forbearance, mediation, or loan modification. That small legal breathing room turned out to be crucial. It's not a free pass, but it buys you time to make choices. The rep said the word mediation like a talisman. Someone will sit down with you in the bank and say, "How can we avoid the house changing hands?" Those two sentences, legal and bureaucratic and oddly human, were the first rope thrown to us. This is the part where the middle act begins, when the panic becomes method. I stopped expecting miracles and started looking for leverage. I sold the old boat that had been a vanity purchase. I cut subscriptions with surgical ruthlessness. I accepted every odd job a neighbor had: mowing, painting, babysitting. At night I watched videos about conservative investing, index funds, bonds, cash runway math, and I read every consumer protection pamphlet the bank sent like Christian scripture. I called a lawyer who charged me for believing, and then I negotiated a flat fee because she liked the story. She called me stubborn in a way that felt like praise. My plan was not heroic. It was arithmetic and stubbornness and the deliberate decision to stop pretending this was temporary. Ellie returned to extra shifts, and for months I became a freelancer with the speed of someone who had no other option. Quick turn projects, logo gigs, web fixes at midnight. I worked until my hands cramped, and then I worked more. There were moments of ugly fatigue. I snapped at the kids for spilling cereal. I lied about where money went because I was too ashamed to say, "I gave it away." Shame is a chemical that rewards secrecy and punishes candor. Meanwhile, I started to play defense on the legal front. The lawyer filed a response to the notice, asking for mediation and requesting documents. We learned a thing I will never forget. Banks are people too, big procedural entities, and people by proxy can be persuaded when you show them numbers that make sense. We created a spreadsheet that made our poverty look like a plan. On the spreadsheet, we put every dollar we could wring from our life: the boat, the vintage amp. Ellie refused to sell at first, but later begrudgingly handed over because survival trumps nostalgia. We compiled pay stubs and letters and a calendar of projected income showing, in black and white, how a modest restructuring could keep us in our home and keep the bank out of a messier legal path. There were nights when I thought about turning it all over to the sheriff. I pictured the repo truck, the cardboard boxes, the indignity of being escorted while neighborhood dogs watched like small, very judgmental deans. My mind invented 1,000 humiliations. In a way, fear was the most creative project I have ever worked on. But then something odd happened. Jordan's name reappeared in a public forum, a small law blog that tracked scams. Someone had aggregated complaints, and there he was. A few names, a few dates. It was a breadcrumb, not a loaf, but it suggested he was not the financial genius he claimed. I fed that breadcrumb to my lawyer, who fed it to the bank. Suddenly, the bank had an incentive that wasn't strictly financial: reputational risk. Their legal team paused, which in banking speak is the sound of gears deciding which way to turn. The combination of our spreadsheet, my frantic arms-on work ethic, and the blog gave the bank an alternative narrative. Here are wrecked human beings who, with a little assistance, can pay more reliably than a protracted foreclosure cost them. We did not get a jackpot. We did not become the story of tragic defeat turned into overnight wealth. What happened was quieter, and in ways, more interesting. The bank offered a loan modification, lower principal for a set period, capitalization of missed payments, a crafted path forward contingent on income proof. We agreed. The modification was not magic, but it was legal permission to breathe. Legally, The timeline between the notice of default and the trustee sale had been enough for negotiation. In many states, that window, which can vary, forced lenders to either proceed through hoops or pause. It was a reminder that law, as boring as it sounds, can be an ally if you know where to look. The months after the modification were a ledger in motion. We paid every agreed amount, late passed but paid. I started a small side project reselling vintage furniture I fixed up in the garage. Ellie grew a small online following for her knitwear and sold pieces to friends of friends. We patched the hole in our budget with sweat and ingenuity. When the occasional strangers online asked how we did it, I wanted to tell them arrogance almost killed us, but humility saved us. The contrition tasted like old coffee, bitter but wakeful. The climax, cinematic because life likes to be dramatic when you least expect it, happened on a Tuesday in late September. I received a thick envelope stamped from the bank, my stomach prepared for bad news. Instead, inside was a letter confirming the permanent modification and, tucked between the legalese, a small phrase that felt like a wink. We appreciate your cooperation. There was no confetti, no orchestra, just the paper laying on my kitchen counter like an unexpected peace treaty. I sat down, and Ellie came in with 2 cups of coffee and the kids following, oblivious to the 1,000 tiny wars their parents were fighting. "So?" she asked. I handed her the letter and watched her read like someone reading relief into existence. She hugged me hard enough to bruise. For a moment, the whole house felt like a hand clasping another hand. But this is not a tidy redemption arc where all wounds mend. A few weeks later, a neighbor, the friend who had introduced me to Jordan, was served with a class action paperwork. The neighborhood murmured. People who had once waved at me now watched and sidled past. Others patted my back, unsure whether they were offering kindness or an awkward apology. People love to sit on the fence when someone falls. They enjoy either hurling rocks or offering lawn chairs. I don't pretend I know what they should have done. I do know what I did. I learned to read trust like a contract and to treat money with the suspicion of a feral animal. Here is the rub and the part that will make you argue in the comments. I kept the house, yes, but I kept it by becoming the kind of person I mocked in better times. Someone who budgets, who sells things he loves, who trades a little pride for a decent roof. Some will say I got lucky, that the bank bent because I was persuasive. Others will say I gamed a system that often favors institutions over people and somehow came up smiling. Both are true. The system is messy. The people inside it are messier. So what do I want you to take away? If you're kind enough to click and stay to the end, tell me, in the comments. Do you think I did the right thing? Was I responsible or reckless? Do banks have an obligation to step in gently, or should they be cold arbiters of contracts? Did Jordan deserve mercy if he was in fact only a clever salesman and not a monster? Tell me which side you're on. Shame me, defend me, teach me. I want your takes because this story ends in a quiet way, but it opens into a noisy debate, and I'm tired of doing the arguing alone. If this struck a nerve like the way a song from your first apartment can, hit subscribe. If you've been conned, tell your story. Anonymize if you must, because the best armory against these cons is a community that knows the patterns. Share this video with someone who needs to see it or someone who thinks they'd never fall. I can't promise a happy ending for everyone, but I can promise you this. If you act early, honestly, and a little ruthlessly, you increase your odds. And if you disagree, I'm ready to read the comments and get schooled.